friends, my name is Katie. Welcome back to my channel, Life Between Words. I wanted to talk to you about books that I really want to reread. These are just 10 books on my shelf that I haven't read in a really long time and I've just been itching to recently. But first I wanted to talk about rereading in general. Rereading is an interesting thing because sometimes people feel like once they've read a book, they never have to pick it up again and they don't have a desire to pick it up again. Other people get a lot of pleasure out of rereading books. I am one of those people, and I think there's something to be said for rereading books. It can be really satisfying to reread a book because you're able to pick up on a lot of things that you missed the first time around. That's especially true for like mysteries and thrillers where you're trying to figure something out and you can feel really smug having finished it and knowing how it ends, going back to the beginning and reading it through and seeing all of those clues that you didn't pick up on the first time and that you are picking up on the second time through. But it's also true that even in books that aren't mysteries, when you reread them, you're picking up on themes and concepts that you also may have missed the first time through. Books are like mirrors. The mirror doesn't change, but the reflection in the mirror does. So every time you reread a book, you are not the same person as you were the first time you read it. So your experience of reading a book again can be entirely new, or different things in the book may hit you at different times in your life. Like, I'm in the midst of rereading Harry Potter right now, and it's the first time that I've read it since becoming a parent. So reading these books now, it's like I'm reading them with fresh eyes because I no longer see Harry really as a peer. I'm much more removed now from Harry, and so I see myself more in the adults in Harry Potter than the kids. It's a really interesting experience, and so because of that, different things are hitting me. Anyway, every time you read a book, you are a different person, and so you bring different things to the table and get different things out of a book. So that's all to say that I think there's value and benefit in rereading books. So, without further ado, here are 10 books that are on my shelf that I'm looking forward to rereading sometime in the near future, whether that's now or a year from now. I will eventually reread these books. The first book is The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. This is jointly written by Mary Ann Schaefer and Annie Barrows. It's an epistolary novel, meaning it's told in letters, which turns off a lot of readers, but I found this book just so delightful and warm and fuzzy. It tells the story of the post-German occupation of the island of Guernsey and a friendship that is struck between Juliet Ashton and these people on the island of Guernsey. This is one of those books where as more time passed after I read it, the more I loved it. I loved it when I read it, but I love it even more now, nostalgically. So I'm really curious to reread it again and see what I think today. The next book that I'd really like to reread is The Secret Life of Bees by Sue Monk Kidd. This book follows a young girl named Lily and her sort of stand-in nanny mother, Rosaline, who end up fleeing Lily's abusive father after Rosaline insults 3 racists in the town that they live in. They flee to a place called Taburn, South Carolina, where they find and make their home with these women, and the story takes off from there. It's a wonderful book of friendship and sisterhood and motherhood. It's really good. The next book that I plan to reread at some point is Water for Elephants by Sarah Gruen. This is a circus tale. Back when it came out, it was hugely popular, but I haven't seen many people talk about it on BookTube. It's kind of lost some of its popularity, I guess. I've seen a couple videos where people mention books about circuses, and this one is never mentioned in them, and this was an unput-downable book for me, and I love it when I find books that I get so wrapped up in the story that I can't put them down. It's kind of rare for me to find a book like that. It's been so long since I've read Water for Elephants that I'm not even sure I can really tell you what it's about. I do remember that there was a love story, and I do remember that it's told from the perspective of this man looking back on his life. And that's about all I know. I remember really enjoying it, so I do want to pick it up and read it again because I loved it back when I read it the first time around. Next is a more frivolous pick. I read this series in college at a friend's recommendation, and I loved it. At the time, the 4th book hadn't come out, which just goes to show you how old I am. So it's The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants by Anne Bracheris. I don't know how to pronounce that last name, Bracheris. Anyway, the first one is The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, and then it's The Second Summer of the Sisterhood, and then it's Girls in Pants, and then it's Forever in Blue. You know, they're nothing spectacular, they're nothing like life-changing, but it's just a really fun YA series about friendship, and you fall in love with the characters. And like I've said many times before, if I fall in love with a character, I am bound to love the book. I'm really looking forward to getting around to these. And actually, Trina from Between Chapters, along with Kayla Rain, and I think a couple others, are hosting a read-along of these books in July. I don't think I'm going to be able to participate, except for maybe one or two of the books. Next is another more frivolous pick, but this was another book that I could not put down. I became a terrible mother when I was reading this book because I just didn't want to stop reading it, and I had a child to take care of, but I just wanted to read. And that book is An Ember in the Ashes. This was a hyped book that really did it for me, although thankfully it wasn't hyped for me because I wasn't really part of BookTube. So I read this without knowing the hype that surrounded it, and maybe that was a good thing. I think that worked in my favor. I really enjoyed this ride. Apparently it gets mixed reviews, but I don't know why, honestly. It sucked me in and never let me go, and I loved the setting. It's sort of an ancient Rome-esque setting. The second book comes out, I think, in August or September, so I want to reread this book before the second book comes out because it's one of those things where sometimes if you read a book really, really fast, you end up not remembering it very well as time goes on, and so that's what happened. I also have been dying to reread Ken Follett's Pillars of the Earth. You know, a lot of historical fiction right now takes place during World War II, and that makes sense. That's a time period that's fascinating, it's ripe for story opportunities, but I love finding historical fiction books that take place during other time periods, and this one does. I read this back in 2010. I was living out in California at the time, and my really good friend Hillary, hi Hillary, recommended this book to me. I loved it. And hearing the synopsis, often people think, why would anyone want to read about the building of a cathedral? That sounds insanely boring. It's very close to 1,000 pages long, and I probably read this sucker in 2 days. That's how much I loved this book. Everything else in my life sort of fell to the wayside as I was reading this book. I was in grad school at the time, and pretty sure I didn't work on my thesis. I read this book. If that says anything about my commitment to the book over my commitment to my thesis, yeah. I also really want to reread all of Jane Austen's books, but I thought I'd just talk about one that I want to reread, and that is Persuasion. Persuasion is about a woman named Anne Elliot who falls in love, but her family disapproves of the match, and so they end up not getting married, and then time passes and they have a second chance. I read Persuasion in college and really loved it. It was the first Jane Austen book that I'd read in a classroom, and I'd really like to revisit it and see what I think about it now, you know, close to 10 years later. This next book I've mentioned on my channel before, and that is Cold Mountain by Charles Fraser. This is a Civil War novel, so it's another historical fiction during a time period that we don't get as much of. It was beautifully, beautifully written, very tragic, heartbreaking, but also hopeful and wonderful. It's about a girl named Ada who's left alone on her family's farm in the South, and then her pre-war sweetheart Inman, who defects from the Confederate Army and is trying to make it home to her. So it goes back and forth between their two perspectives and their encounters and how they grow and change during this journey back together. I've also mentioned this book at least once on my channel. It's one of my all-time favorites. Top 5 for sure, but probably top like 1 or 2. I love this book so much. I never hear it talked about, and that is Peace Like a River by Leif Enger. I say this is one of my all-time favorite books, but I've only ever read it once, so it is high time for me to reread it. It's a beautiful story about a father's love for his children. It has themes of miraculous faith and healing and redemption and hope and family, and it is just so wonderful. I first heard about this book back when I went to college. When I was a freshman, first arrived on campus, I walked into the college bookstore, and this book was plastered everywhere because Leif Enger is from Minnesota, and he's obviously Norwegian, and I went to St. Olaf College, which is in Minnesota and is a very Lutheran Norwegian school, so they had this book featured at the bookstore for a long time, but I didn't read it then. My mom actually read it, and then she passed it along to me and said, Katie, you need to read this book, and so I did, and I fell in love, and I need to reread it. And then finally, another book series that I have talked about many times already on my channel, but I need to reread it because it is my heart book. I love it so much. I think it's so beautifully written. I love the story that it tells, and that is Anne of Green Gables, the whole series. There are 8 books, and I will pull them out of this box and show them to you because I love this collection. I just think it's so pretty. It was published by a Canadian publisher, Tundra Books, and it's kind of hard to get in the United States. First is Anne of Green Gables, then Anne of Avonlea, then Anne of the Island, then Anne of Windy Poplars, which is probably my least favorite in the whole series, then Anne's House of Dreams, then Anne of Ingleside, then Rainbow Valley, and finally Rilla of Ingleside. One of the things that I love about Anne of Green Gables is that whenever I find a book that I love, I never want it to end. I want to know what happens next. And with Anne, you follow her through her adult life, through her having kids, and then you see her kids grow up. The story just goes on and on and on, and so because I love Anne so much, I love seeing her at every stage of her life. I just find that a beautiful thing. And I love all of the characters in this book so much. They are a part of my life. They are my friends. So anyway, I really, really want to reread Anne of Green Gables. So those are 10 books. Well, some of them are more series, but I'm saying 10 books. 10 things that I want to reread sometime in the nearish future. Please let me know down below what books you would like to reread, or if you're a rereader, or if you're not a rereader. I'd love to have a discussion about that. Let's chat in the comment section. Please remember to like and subscribe and comment if you wish, and I will talk to you all later. Thanks for stopping by.